On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, we talk about some of the common mobility limitations for the deadlift. We talk about what may happen when your knee pops after an ACL reconstruction, and we talk about the effects of static stretching on power development. The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. We're up in Boston. We are at Champion PT and Performance. You know the crew by now. Well, no, we just keep doing these episodes over and over again. Mike Scaduto, Lenny Macrina. Well, we're going way out of order. Dan Pope, Dave Tilley. Everybody has their own websites. Check them out. They're pretty cool. But no, keep asking some questions. You guys are doing a great job. We're getting, the questions are getting better, actually. I actually enjoyed this batch, kind of going through the latest batch and see some of the good ones out there. We're starting to, I was just going to say that we're getting like a bigger, diverse group of questions and stuff, which probably means our readership or listenership.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Listenership in this. Our audience, our subscribers are probably getting more diverse too. So keep asking away. Anything you guys want to talk about, PT, fitness, sports, performance, business, specific sport things, anything you guys want to talk about. So awesome. We have two very whimsical physical therapy students here today. Dashing physical therapy schools. We have Johnny LaRoof is on fire from Clarkson University, otherwise known as
Buzz Lightyear.
And we have Brooks Calvin Klein, because we can't figure out a better nickname, otherwise known as
Woody.
Right. So what's the theme on that, Dave? Again, just
Toy Story.
Remind everyone.
All right, here's a story. Quick story.
There's a story.
I couldn't figure out his name. I committed to Brooksby Village. Horrific, right?
Yeah.
One day during treatment.
Nobody outside of your town.
He refuses to admit this, but I asked him to get like ice or something, and he literally looked at me like this. He's like, all right. And I was like, oh my God, he looks like Woody. Like, he looks exactly like Woody. And the patient I was with was like, yeah, definitely. I was like, all right, your name's Woody.
Woody.
And then we got Buzz to go along with him.
Boom. Buzz.
From Star Command.
Nice. Who's first? What are your Buzz? Who wants to?
I'll take the first one.
All right, buzz it up, Buzz.
All right, Bobby from Washington, D.C. What are the most common mobility limitations you see that cause people to compensate during a deadlift?
What are the most common limitations to compensate during a deadlift? David, why don't you start this one? What do you think?
Grandma?
Dr. Tilley?
Trouble?
David. What do we got? Dr. Tilley?
So I think that not as commonly assessed for, but just pure posterior hip hinging, like the ability to just, hinge your hips back far, whether that's...
What is that? That's what
capsular, maybe. It's a tougher sell, but capsular, post tissue, like soft tissue.
Of the hip?
Of the hip, yeah. So hip soft tissue, hip posterior capsule. I think part of it comes down to, just spinal alignment, the ability to maintain neutral spine with core control as you drift your hips back. I think that most people jump to posterior chain hamstrings and more neural type stiffness, but I think that people just don't hinge a lot in their daily life well, so that probably is something they lose. And then a conventional, narrow stance deadlift is pretty demanding mobility-wise if you're going to do that. So I guess Dan, the human deadlifter, can do more on this topic. But
nice. All right. So good ones though. So maybe some posterior hip tightness. Yeah, I think hamstring tightness is real. I think there could be like other things, but hamstring tightness. What else, Dan?
Man, I'd say those are the big bang for your buck ones. I do see a lot of people, and it's not just a deadlift, but if you're trying to do increased range of motion stuff like a snatch, the bar path is really important, and be able to push the knees back so the bar can go kind of through the knees, right? Requires a ton of mobility in order to keep a neutral spine. I think also for Olympic weightlifting, a lot of times we're really trying our best to stay upright with our chest, which is going to increase the range of motion to bands, where when you're deadlifting as a powerlifter, you can kind of get your chest coming down a bit, which gives you a little more range of motion. So especially for something like a snatch, it's going to be really important. But I would say the most common one is probably going to be hamstrings, neural tension, maybe some of the posterior hip too. And the people that are really bad at things like toe touch might have trouble with bar path or in snatch. So what I'll do is if I see someone who's having a really tough time, I'll do something like a toe touch assessment or a straight leg raise. And then a lot of times it is kind of the tension on the back. So
yeah, I think the difference is what you pointed out. Like I think like upper back mobility is huge for like a conventional deadlift versus like an Olympic lifting deadlift. When you watch Olympic lifting clean deadlifts or clean pulls, it's much more vertical, and like that's very hard for some people to like get the bar in front of them.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's probably an overlooked one. Yeah. I like that. So that makes sense, and I think the question was about mobility, right? But what if like you're in a huge anterior pelvic tilt? What does that do? I mean, is that a mobility thing? Is that an alignment thing? Like, because that's gonna put your hamstrings maybe in a longer position.
Pre-tension, yeah.
Pre-tension. It's gonna be super hard to shift. So, I mean, I don't know. Any you want to touch on that at all, or?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a pendulum swings kind of thing. I think you see this sometimes when people are teaching the squat. They'll teach like sit back. That sit back cue happens so much that people end up like bringing their toes up off the floor, and it goes a little too far. I think the same thing happens when people are trying to find tension in Olympic weightlifting. They say, feel your hamstrings, feel your hamstrings, feel your hamstrings. So what people end up doing is doing a lot of anterior pelvic tilt to get a stretch in the hamstrings, so they're sending those hips way far back in something like a clean or a deadlift when they're trying to find the right position. And because of that, they're probably getting a little overextension in that position, which
I like
could lead
that.
to some hip problems,
So-
spine problems.
Could be mobility, but maybe you're also pre-tensioning and too much anterior tilt, and you're putting yourself in a disadvantage mobility-wise. So interesting, awesome. Woody, wood it up, Woody? No, doesn't work as good as Buzz.
Alan from Venice, Florida. My daughter is a high-level soccer player, 10 months out from left ACL revision. We are being very conservative and waiting at least 12 months prior to return to sport. Yesterday she was jogging to the ball, preparing to strike it with her left leg, instep strike, and during the backswing felt a pop in the swinging knee. The next morning it was swollen, stiff, and painful. Do you have any thoughts on what she could have done?
Well, I think first lesson to be learned here is always tell us which knee the surgery was beforehand, because I don't know if we can tell, but it sounds like the swing leg,
Is her revision leg?
the swing leg in a kick.
Yeah, preparing to strike it with her left leg, and it's the left ACL
It is left
that had the
ACL?
revision.
Oh,
yeah.
he said that?
Yeah.
I missed that. Okay, I'm sorry. So all right, so left leg was swinging. Well, anyway, it's a revision, which tells you a lot right there. This is not her first ACL on this side. Something didn't go well. So this is a revision, that's one. But all right, even with a benign thing like that, it popped. The next day it's painful, swollen, sore. LannyMcCrina.com, what do you got?
Brown hangs.
Yeah.
I mean, but pop, swollen.
pop
right
swollen.
there.
I mean, typically if it's a delayed swelling, like it got swollen the next day, then maybe it's not as bad as you think. Maybe it's not the dreaded ACL. It was planted in trying to swing with the opposite leg, so you always have to rule in or rule out the ACL. But then you start thinking meniscus, maybe a patella instability or a patella dislocation or subluxation. That would be my big three, would be patella, meniscus, and ACL. Knowing she has a history of ACL on the other side, there's a higher chance she's probably going
I
to...
think it's the same side.
Swing
Am I
leg.
wrong on that? It's the same leg, right?
I thought she had left.
Super
I thought she
confused.
had
Planted
left
right,
kicking with
swung
her
left.
Okay, left
And her left
ACL
is ACL.
revision. Preparing to strike the ball with her left leg,
And it's the swing leg.
and then
Pop!
I felt
So
a pop
it's the-
in the swinging knee.
So
Okay, so
Yeah.
okay.
it's the wait, show me again. I'm confused.
Okay, so
It does not sound strike.
All right, so
right. So without knowing all of her details, I think my answer doesn't change.
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to rule in as much patella subluxation, but I definitely would think about meniscus, ACL. If she had a hamstring graft for the revision and or the primary, maybe it was like a little scarring, because you do lay down scar tissue in that area. Some say your semi-T will grow back, or your gracilis will grow back, some tendon, so maybe it was that. But with the swelling, that's a little bit more concerning to me, so I would definitely want to rule out meniscus or ACL.
yeah, I would say that I would say that the mechanism is surely optimistic, right? It doesn't seem like that, like kind of I think what you're alluding to in the question, not that big of a deal. It's the kick leg that seems weird that it happened, but the pop and swelling is concerning enough. I think your next move is to go back to the surgeon. I think
Definitely,
that's
yeah.
pretty obvious there. Pop and swelling's typically not good, right? But maybe it's not the worst. But like Len said, probably meniscus, ACL tear again. And look, it didn't have to tear on that mechanism right
Right.
there. It could have just been like the final straw. But ACL, meniscus, maybe a patellar subluxation, something like that. But the pain and swellings, that's the unusual part. That's the curveball. So I would definitely look into that. So awesome. What else? We got one more?
Yep. This question's from Jack Reynolds. I looked at research stating that doing stretching or some type of foam roll before an explosive activity reduces power and elasticity, therefore you should avoid. What do you recommend for those that need range of motion though before these activities?
I like that's actually a good question. So there's some research that shows static stretching will say decreases your power output afterwards. So if you stretch your hamstrings and then immediately went for like a jump, your vertical would be less, right? Something like that. I think that's been shown in multiple planes of motions in sports, which is interesting. But I like the question though. But what do you do if somebody's limited and you want them to work on their mobility? Who wants to start?
I guess I'll say something. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I like this stuff. Well, what I will say is that it sounded like it was foam rolling also decreases your ability to produce force. I haven't read that, so maybe there's a research study you guys have, but I think overwhelmingly we've shown that foam rolling beforehand does not affect your power or your strength. And I think this is something I've heard a little bit more from kind of like the mobility WOD type stuff. I know Kelly likes to do rolling afterwards because he feels like it might shut down some of the tissue, but all the studies I've read, that doesn't happen. Overwhelmingly, foam rolling beforehand is not going to affect your strength, and it's going to improve your range of motion. So I think that's probably worthwhile. If you have an individual that's chronically stiff though, maybe they need to do some more stretching, that type of thing. I would say afterwards is probably the best. The other piece is that what is that athlete trying to accomplish? Are they trying to get better at their sport? If so, I'd say then maybe you need to prioritize some of that stretching before you do some of the strength training, because maybe that mobility limitation is the biggest problem. Plus, you're still going to gain performance ability by training strength, even though you might be, 2 to 5% different strength-wise during your lifts. I feel like it's probably not going to have too big an effect in the long run. But if it's right before like a powerlifting competition, I wouldn't, stretch the hamstrings and then immediately jump onto the bar. That's probably not going to work well.
Right, that makes sense. I feel original research on this topic showed that force output was decreased after static stuff. It seems familiar to me that there was a study that showed that on self-myofascial release too, but I forget. So I'm going to say I don't know the definitive answer, but I think there's been other studies that completely refute this concept, and I think there's two main things you got to think about with the research. One is not everybody's the same. If a really loose person does static stretching ahead of time, they're probably going to have a decrease in power output that's different than somebody that's really tight. Maybe somebody does need it. So I don't think we can extrapolate that info to everybody. I think that would be my first thing. There may be some people where it's not as big of a deal. I do feel like our loose people that overstretch do get less powerful, right? But the other thing that research is starting to show now is that if you do static stretching and then dynamic movement stuff and then measured your power, it's not down. So one of two things happened. Either the static was mitigated by the dynamic stuff like that, or simply time, right? So maybe your power output is decreased with static stretching for X seconds or minutes, but that's certainly not going to stick like that for hours. That seems a little excessive to me. So by the time you do some dynamic movement and start moving around, your power is probably back. Right, so I think that's something to think about. Some of the research was stretch, jump, right? And you're like,
stretch,
oh,
back,
okay.
squat.
Yeah, and it's different there. So something to think about. So awesome. Well, another good round of questions. That's 3, right? Perfect. Good round of questions. Appreciate it, guys. Go to MikeReinold.com, click on that podcast link, and you can fill out the form to ask us any crazy questions like this. Anything you guys want to talk about would be awesome. But ask us some questions. Go to iTunes and Spotify, rate, review, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks so much.